The Athari mother, Keela, let out a silent wail, her 6 arms trembling. As she cradled the shattered remains of her nest, the soft shells were broken, empty, lifeless. The warmth of her offspring gone stolen in the dead of night by faceless raiders, her kind only birthed once a century. The loss was more than just grief, it was extinction. She felt it in every fiber of her being, a hollow ache that could never be filled. She reached out with her tendrils, tracing the marks left in the sand. The raiders had moved quickly, efficiently. The tracks led toward the sky, toward the blackness of space. And she knew they were gone. Her cries were soundless, but the others heard them. The elders came, their deep violet eyes full of sorrow. They touched her shoulders, a gesture of shared pain. They spoke in hushed tones. But she did not hear them. What could they say? There was no justice beyond their world, no enforcers to bring back what was lost, no mercy from those who saw their kind as nothing more than curiosities. For the highest bidder, the galaxy was vast and cruel, and the Athari was small. Keela felt the weight of her ancestors pressing down upon her. She had failed. She had not been strong enough, not been fast enough, not been enough at all. She knew what came next, the ritual of mourning, the gathering of the kin, the slow fading of hope. But something inside her refused to surrender. She would not accept this fate. She clenched her fists, her tendrils, coiling with a resolve she had never felt before. No, this was not the end. She would find them, she would bring them back, even if she had to tear through the stars herself. A low hum rippled through the air. The elders turned their heads to the sky. A ship approached, a sleek vessel, cutting through the clouds, its metal hull reflecting the twin suns. Keela narrowed her eyes. This was not a ship of her people. It bore the marks of the outsiders, the ones who came and went, traders, explorers, scavengers. Sometimes worse. She stepped forward as the vessel landed, kicking up a cloud of dust. The hatch hissed open, and from within stepped a figure, tall, broad, draped in worn fabric, a weapon strapped to his side. But his hands were raised in a gesture of peace. His face was strange to her 2 eyes, set deep beneath a furrowed brow, a sharp jaw rough with age and hardship. His gaze met hers, and for a moment there was silence. The elders hesitated. Keela, did not she move toward him, her breath steady, her tendrils shifting with unreadable emotion. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice like the rustling of wind through leaves. But the figure did not flinch. His expression did not change. "My name is Cole Marshall," he said, and his voice was like stone, rough, unwavering. "I know who took your young, and I know where they are." Her chest tightened. The wind around them seemed to still. The elders exchanged glances. One of them, a frail but wise ancient, stepped forward. "How do we know you speak the truth? How do we know this is not a trick?" Cole's lips curled slightly, not a smile, not a sneer, just a flicker of something like understanding. "Because he said I came to bring them back." Keela stared at him, searching for deception, for falsehoods. But there were none, only something raw, something fierce. She did not know this human, but she knew his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had lost before, someone who had fought for something precious and had refused to let it be taken from him. The elders murmured among themselves. Distrust was woven into their bones. Experience had taught them that the outsiders only ever took, never gave back. But Keela did not care about the elders. She did not care about history. She cared only for one thing. She stepped closer, standing before Cole Marshall, her voice steady. "Where are they?" He exhaled, glancing toward the sky, toward the stars, toward the endless unknown. With a certainty that sent a shiver through her, he answered, "They were the kind of men who don't let go of what they steal. But that's never stopped me before." Light years away, the lawless depths of the Orion void. Cole Marshall leaned against a sticky bar counter, the stench of engine grease and cheap liquor thick in the air around him. The Spaceport Tavern was the kind of place where deals were struck in whispers and lies, what ended in silence, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and nobody gave answers unless credits were involved. Cole wasn't here for pleasure. He never was. He was here for information. And he had just found exactly what he was looking for. Across the dimly lit room, a group of smugglers sat huddled around a corner table, their voices hushed, but not hushed enough. Cole tilted his head, just slightly, pretending to sip from his glass as he listened to the conversation. They were laughing, boasting their latest haul was something special, something rare, something that would make them rich beyond belief. Rare Athari eggs. One of them muttered, worth more than a starship. If you sell to the right buyer, a collector on Vereth Prime is paying triple usual price. If we get them there in one piece. Cole felt his grip tighten around his glass, his jaw clenched for all the horrors he had seen across the galaxy. There was something about this that made his blood boil. Athari eggs, fragile, delicate, unborn youngs, stolen, ripped from their mother, their value measured not in life, but in currency. It was the kind of thing that turned his stomach, the kind of thing that made him want to break bones, the kind of thing he had spent years trying to ignore because getting involved meant risking everything. But he couldn't ignore this, not this. He had seen the look in Keyless eyes, the silent grief, the desperation, the kind of loss that carved itself into the soul. If he turned his back now, he would be no better than the bastards selling those eggs. With a slow exhale, he pushed himself off the bar, his movements casual, controlled his mind, already forming a plan. He approached the table, his boots scuffing against the metal floor. The smugglers barely glanced at him. They were too wrapped up in their own greed, their own arrogance. Cole knew men like this. They thought they were untouchable, thought they were smarter than everyone else, thought they were predators. But predators never saw the bullet coming before it hit. Between their eyes, he pulled out a chair, sat down across from them, leaned forward, elbows on the table, and let his voice drop into a low, gravelly drawl. Heard you boys got something special. His words made them pause, eyes narrowing, the biggest one a scar running down his cheek. Gave Cole a slow once over, and smirked. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. Who's asking? Cole didn't smile, didn't blink, just reached into his jacket and pulled out a handful of credits, letting them clink onto the table. I buy rare things, he said, simple, direct. Let the words settle in the air. Smugglers were predictable. They only cared about two things: profit and survival, and right now, Cole wanted them to think he was just another buyer. They glanced at each other, weighing their options. The scarred one nodded slowly. Rare things come at a price, he said. And this here is the rarest thing in the quadrant. Cole tapped his fingers against the table, unfazed. Heard the Athari only lay once a century. That true, the smuggler chuckled, leaned back in his chair. That's right, which is why these beauties are worth more than some backwater colony's entire economy. He reached into a pouch on his belt, pulled out a small holo display, and flicked it on there. There were half a dozen eggs pulsing softly in the dim blue light of the screen, fragile and helpless. Cole let out a slow breath, staring at the image, memorizing every detail, the markings, the shape, the container. They were stored in. Then he leaned back, matching the smuggler's lazy arrogance. "Were you keeping them?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. The scarred one laughed loud and sharp, shaking his head. "Nice try, pal. Deals don't work that way. We get the credits first, then maybe you get a location." Cole let out a slow, easy grin, reaching into his jacket. The smugglers tensed, thinking he was going for a weapon, but instead he pulled out another stack of credits, twice as much as before, setting them on the table this time. The laughter stopped, greed flickered in their eyes before they could stop themselves. A scarred one leaned in, lowering his voice. "Warehouse on Beltrax VI, shipment leaves in 2 days. You want, and you better be ready to pay up." Cole nodded, as if considering the offer, but his decision had already been made. He was getting those eggs back, and the smugglers were never going to see their payday. He pushed back his chair, stood up, and with one last glance at the holo display, turned toward the exit. The smugglers went back to their conversation, thinking they had just made the easiest credits of their lives. They had no idea that by the time the sun rose on Beltrax VI, every single one of them would regret ever laying their hands on those eggs. The warehouse on Beltrax VI stood like a fortress in the middle of a barren wasteland, surrounded by rusted towers and automated turrets. The smugglers were not careless. They knew the value of their cargo, knew that others might come looking to take it from them. The perimeter was lined with motion sensors and guard droids, their red eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Inside, the stolen Athari eggs were locked in stasis pods, humming softly with energy, fragile lives trapped in cold glass, waiting for a future they might never have. Cole Marshall crouched on a ridge overlooking the compound, the night winds howling around him. His fingers tightened around his rifle, his mind calculating the best way, and he had faced worse odds before. But this was different. This was not a fight for survival. This was a fight for something bigger, something that actually mattered. He tapped a button on his wrist device, pulling up a blueprint of the facility courtesy of a black market contact who owed him a favor. The main entrance was too heavily guarded, the back was reinforced. But there a weak spot, a maintenance tunnel running beneath the compound, probably used for waste disposal or emergency exits, a tight squeeze. But better than walking straight into a firing squad. Cole took a slow breath, checking his gear. He traveled light, a rifle, a combat knife, a few EMP charges, and his wits. That would have to be enough, because once he was inside, there was no turning back. Moving quickly, he descended from the ridge, staying low in the shadows. The closer he got, the more he could hear muffled voices from inside, smugglers, laughing, bragging about their upcoming payday. One of them mentioned a buyer arriving soon, which meant Cole was running out of time. Reaching the maintenance hatch, he pried it open and slipped inside. The tunnel was cramped, reeking of oil and decay, but it led him exactly where he needed to go, the storage wing, where the eggs were kept. He pressed against the wall, listening ahead, footsteps, voices, 2 guards stationed outside the door, armed and unaware of the storm about to hit them. Cole moved fast, silence striking from the darkness. Before they could react, one guard went down with a chokehold. The other barely had time to draw his weapon before Cole's knife slashed across his wrist, sending the blaster clattering to the floor. He caught the man's collar, yanked him close, and whispered, "Where are the keys to the stasis pods?" The smuggler gasped, struggling against Cole's grip, but the human's strength was like iron. A pocket left side. Cole found the key card, shoved the man away, and knocked him out cold. No alarms, no noise, just how he needed it. Moving to the storage room, he swiped the keycard. The door slid open, and there they were, 6 stasis pods lined up, glowing softly, their contents pulsing with life. Cole exhaled, pressing a hand against the nearest pod. He had made it, but getting out was another problem. He tapped his wrist device, sending a signal to his ship parked a few miles away. The renegade spirit would begin its automated warm-up routine. He needed to move fast. He deactivated the stasis locks, one by one, securing the eggs into a portable grav crate. Then he heard the unmistakable click of a weapon behind him. "Turn around slowly," said a voice, rough, dangerous. Cole did as he was told, his hands raised in mock surrender. The scarred smuggler from the bar stood there, a rifle aimed squarely at Cole's chest. Behind him, more guards spilling into the room, weapons drawn. "You really thought you could walk in here and steal from me?" the smuggler sneered, shaking his head. "I knew you would trouble the moment you sat down at my table." Cole smirked, despite himself. "Guess I wasn't subtle enough." The smuggler chuckled low and cold. "Doesn't matter, you're gonna die here, and those eggs are still getting sold." But before he could pull the trigger, the lights flickered, then went dark. The emergency alarms blared. Confusion erupted as the entire compound was plunged into chaos. Cole moved in an instant, grabbing the nearest guard and using him as a human shield as blaster fire erupted through the darkness. The EMP charges he had planted on the outer perimeter had just gone off, frying the security grid, and every automated turret outside the facility was blind, deaf, and useless now. It was just men and chaos, and Cole thrived in chaos. He ducked, rolled, grabbed a fallen blaster, and fired back, dropping 2 guards before they could react. The scarred smuggler cursed, barking orders, trying to regain control. But it was too late. Cole grabbed the grav crate with the eggs and sprinted toward the exit, taking cover behind storage containers. Every step, every breath calculated. He could hear reinforcements pouring in, but he was already moving, weaving through the shadows towards the emergency exit. He had less than 3 minutes before backup arrived, before the power was restored, before his window closed completely. He had come this far, and there was no way in hell he was leaving without those eggs. The emergency exit loomed ahead, a thick, reinforced door, half rusted from years of neglect. Cole Marshall gritted his teeth, gripping the grav crate tight in one hand while firing blind shots behind him. With the other, blaster fire streaked past his head, scorching the walls, filling the air with the acrid smell of burnt metal. The smugglers were closing in, shouting orders, boots pounding against the floor. But they were disoriented, scattered. The EMP blast had knocked out half their security systems, and they were scrambling to adjust. Cole knew he had only seconds before they regained full control, before the alarms triggered the backup generators, before the turrets outside came back online and tore him apart. He reached the exit, slammed his fist against the control panel, and cursed the power was down, which meant the door was locked shut. No time to hack it, no time to think. Cole dropped to one knee, pulled an explosive charge from his belt, slapped it onto the metal surface, and twisted the timer down to 3 seconds. He scooped up the grav crate, shielding it with his body. As the charge detonated, the explosion rocked the corridor, sending heat and debris in every direction. The force of it nearly knocked Cole off his feet, but he pushed forward, coughing through the smoke, as the door crumbled inward, revealing the open night sky. Fresh air slammed into him, a stark contrast to the stale metal stench of the warehouse. But he had no time to enjoy it, because outside the real fight was waiting. The outer perimeter was alive with chaos smugglers, stumbling from the guard towers, shouting in confusion as they tried to get their systems back online. Cole sprinted across the landing platform, his ship, the Renegade Spirit, already visible in the distance, its engines roaring as it began its remote liftoff sequence. He had pre-programmed it to meet him at this location. All he had to do was survive long enough to reach it. Move, 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 his mind screamed at him. His legs burned, his lungs ached. But he pushed forward, the grav crate hovering inches above the ground beside him, its delicate cargo pulsing with soft light, a reminder of why he couldn't stop, why he couldn't fail. Behind him, the scarred smuggler had recovered from the explosion, his rage boiling over as he stormed onto the platform, flanked by more armed men. "You don't know who you're messing with," he rolled his rifle, firing wild shots, barely missing Cole. "You think you can just take from us and walk away? We own this sector, we own everything." Cole didn't bother responding. Words meant nothing here, only action. He dived behind a stack of supply crates, returning fire precision shots, dropping 2 smugglers before they even had a chance to react. But there were too many of them, more than he had expected. The scarred smuggler barked orders, calling for air support, and that's when Cole heard it, the screeching whine of a gunship powering up nearby. His stomach clenched. If they got that thing in the air, he was dead. His ship would never outrun it. He had to act now. Gritting his teeth, he activated his wrist device, sending new commands to the Renegade Spirit. The ship veered, slightly adjusting its descent thrusters, blasting down with enough force to kick up a whirlwind of dust and debris. The smugglers recoiled, caught off guard by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Cole used the momentary distraction to move, bolting for the loading ramp as the Renegade Spirit hovered just meters above the ground. But the scarred smuggler wasn't done, yet he aimed his rifle, lining up a perfect shot. Cole saw the glint of metal, the trigger squeeze. He knew he wouldn't make it. Then from the shadows, a blur of movement, a figure lunged from the side, tackling the smuggler to the ground. A sharp, guttural cry of pain rang out. Cole didn't stop to question it, didn't stop to look. He leaped onto the ramp, slamming his fist against the control panel. The hatch began to close. The ship pulling higher into the sky. The gunship behind them was still trying to launch, its engines sputtering as the smugglers inside scrambled to power it up. Cole wasted no time. He sprinted to the cockpit, slammed into the pilot's seat, and gripped the controls, his fingers dancing over switches. The Renegade Spirit lurched forward, engines flaring as he pushed them to their limit. The ship rolled through the sky, breaking free of the compound. But behind him, the enemy gunship finally lifted off its cannons, swiveling, locking onto him, targeting alarms. Blared. Cole cursed under his breath. They had firepower. He couldn't outgun them, but he could outfly them. Pulling hard on the controls, he sent the Renegade Spirit into a steep nosedive, barely skimming the surface of the wasteland below, dust and rock kicking up behind him. The gunship followed, its pilot skilled, ruthless, matching his every move. Cole clenched his jaw, sweat beading on his forehead. This was going to be close. He needed an escape route fast. But Beltrax VI was a dead world, no cover, no terrain to lose them in. Except the asteroid belt 5 clicks east, dense, unpredictable, full of debris that could tear both ships apart. It was a gamble, a deadly one, but he was out of options. Gritting his teeth, he angled his ship toward the belt, pushing the engines to their breaking point behind him. The gunship hesitated for only a second, but it was enough, because Cole wasn't slowing down. He was going to make it. or he was going to die trying. The renegade spirit tore through the thin atmosphere of Beltrax VI, its engines screaming against the strain as Cole Marshall pushed the ship harder, faster every second, counted every move had to be perfect behind him. The gunship stayed close, its cannons locking on its pilots, relentless, determined to take him down. Cole flicked his eyes toward the grav crate strapped beside him. The Athari eggs still pulsed with life, fragile, helpless, and utterly dependent on him. He tightened his grip on the controls, his breath steady, his mind razor sharp. If these bastards thought he was going to let them take his cargo, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, a chaotic swirl of shattered rock and ice, tumbling through the void, sharp, jagged, unpredictable. It was the kind of place only a fool or a desperate man would fly into, and Cole was both. He angled his ship hard, sending it straight into the debris field. Alarms blared, proximity sensors screaming at him to turn back, to pull up, to do anything but keep going. He ignored them, twisting the renegade spirit between tumbling boulders, weaving through gaps barely wide enough for his wings. Every maneuver had to be exact, one miscalculation, and he would be nothing more than another shattered wreck among the stars. Behind him, the gunship hesitated, its pilots realizing too late what was happening. They were bigger, slower, their ship built for brute force, not agility. They tried to follow, tried to match Cole's movements, but they were too slow. A massive chunk of ice spun into their path, forcing them to veer sharply. Their cannon fire went wide, missing Cole completely as they struggled to keep up. Cole grinned, but there was no time to celebrate. He wasn't safe. Yet, he twisted the ship sideways, squeezing through a narrow gap between two colliding asteroids. The gunship attempted the same, but their bulk worked against them. They clipped a rock, their right engines sparking violently. Cole saw his chance. He reached for the weapons control, flipped a switch, and let loose a burst of laser fire. The shot wasn't meant to destroy them, just to finish what the asteroid had started. His bolts struck their damaged engine. A small explosion rippled through their hull. Their ship lurched wildly, spinning out of control. Cole watched as they spiraled helplessly deeper into the asteroid belt, their voices screaming over the comms before static consumed them. He let out a slow breath. He had won, but he wasn't done yet. He set course for deep space, his hands steady on the controls, the worst of the danger behind him. But the weight in his chest hadn't lifted yet. He tapped a command into his console, opening a secure channel to Keela, the Athari mother. She had been waiting, watching, hoping. Her voice crackled through the comms, uncertain, hesitant. Cole Marshall. She whispered her kind, did not speak loudly, but her words carried more weight than a warship. Did you? He exhaled, staring at the grav crate beside him. They're safe, he said, every single one of them. Silence. Followed then the softest sound, a breath, a whisper, a feeling he couldn't describe. Keela wasn't the kind to cry, not in the way humans did, but he could feel the emotion radiating through the comms. She had prepared herself for loss, had steeled her heart for grief, and now he had given her something she never expected: hope. "Thank you," she finally said. Cole let himself lean back in his chair, the tension in his muscles slowly unraveling. He had done a lot of things in his life, fought in wars, smuggled weapons, stolen from the powerful, just to give to those who had nothing. He had never considered himself a hero, never cared to be one, but this felt different. He set the course for the Athari homeworld, watching as the stars stretched around him. He knew this wasn't over. The smugglers would come looking for him. The buyer on Verith Prime wouldn't let this go. He had made enemies tonight, powerful ones. But none of that mattered, not now. All that mattered was getting these eggs home, getting them back to their mother. The galaxy was cruel, full of monsters who took and took and took. But tonight Cole Marshall had stolen something back. And for once, just this, once he felt like he had done something right. The renegade spirit cut through the void of space, the hum of its engines, a steady heartbeat against the silence. Cole Marshall sat in the cockpit, his hands light on the controls, his eyes flicking between the nav screen and the grav crate strapped securely beside him. The Athari eggs pulsed softly with their own inner glow, delicate, fragile, each one holding a life that had nearly been lost. His job wasn't done, not yet. The smugglers were beaten, their gunship lost in the asteroid belt, but Cole knew better than to think he was in the clear. Verith Prime was still out there, the buyer, someone powerful enough to fund a crew of smugglers, someone rich enough to pay triple the usual price for stolen life. People like that didn't just let things go. He had made an enemy, tonight one that would be watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. But that was a problem for another day. Right now his focus was simple: deliver the eggs, get them home, back to Keela, back where they belonged. A soft beeping from the comms panel snapped him from his thoughts. An incoming message, encrypted, unknown sender. Cole hesitated a moment before patching it through. Static filled the cockpit, then a voice, one he recognized instantly. Cole's smooth, calculated, well, Cole Marshall, a man who never knew when to mind his own business. Cole sighed, running a hand through his hair. Joran, he muttered, knew you'd be calling sooner or later. Joran Varric, high-ranking fixer for the Galactic syndicates, the kind of man who operated in shadows, the kind of man whose threats weren't just words. Cole had crossed him before, always managed to slip away before things got too ugly. But this time was different. You made a mistake tonight, Joran continued, his voice like silk wrapped around a dagger. Those eggs belong to us. You know what happens to people who steal from us. Cole leaned back in his chair boots, propped against the console, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Let me guess, you send some of your goons after me, maybe put a bounty on my head. Maybe you come after me yourself. That about right, Joran chuckled, low and dangerous, something like that. Cole, you don't get it, do you? This wasn't just a job. Those eggs were spoken for. The client isn't happy. And when they're not happy, neither am I. Cole's fingers tapped idly against the console, but there was an edge to his voice. When he spoke, you think I care? You think any of your threats mean a damn thing to me? I saw what those smugglers did. I saw what they were planning. Those eggs aren't a payday. Their lives. Joran sighed like a disappointed teacher talking to a stubborn student. Noble Cole, always playing the hero, but heroes die alone in the dark, and that's where you're headed. The transmission cut off. No threats, no demands, just silence. Cole stared at the empty screen, jaw tight. Joran wasn't lying. He wouldn't let this slide. Cole had just painted a target on his back, and he had no doubt the syndicate's reach would stretch far and wide. Didn't matter, he had a job to finish. He pushed the renegade spirit into a higher jump speed. The Athari homeworld wasn't far now, just a few more jumps, and he'd be there. As the ship hurtled through hyperspace, Cole allowed himself a moment of stillness. He glanced at the grav crate, the soft glow of the eggs casting gentle light across the cockpit. Keela's voice still echoed in his mind, the way she had spoken, the way her breath had caught when she realized her children were coming home. That alone was worth the trouble, that alone made it worth the fight. But deep in his gut, Cole knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The renegade spirit emerged from hyperspace, the streaking stars collapsing into the vast view of the Athari homeworld. Cole Marshall exhaled, gripping the controls as the blue-green planet loomed before him, its atmosphere swirling with soft clouds. Untouched, pristine, a world that had managed to remain out of the grasp of the syndicates and warlords for centuries. But now it was in danger. Because of him, because he had made enemies, powerful ones who would not forget what he had done. He pushed those thoughts aside for now. All that mattered was getting the eggs home. His comms crackled to life, Keela's voice breaking through. Cole Marshall. She whispered her words, filled with something he had never heard from her before, something hesitant and fragile. Hope you'll have returned safely. Cole glanced at the grav crate beside him, the soft pulsing glow of the eggs, still steady, still alive. Yeah, he said, voice rough but warm. I got them. Keela silence stretched between them, then a slow breath of relief. You are cleared for landing, Cole Marshall. We are waiting. He guided the renegade spirit down through the atmosphere, the ship shaking slightly as it broke through the thick clouds below him. Stretched endless jungles, rivers that shimmered under the golden sun, towering crystal-like trees that pulsed with bioluminescence. Athari settlements were hidden beneath the canopy, organic structures woven into nature rather than built atop it, a place of peace, a place that didn't belong in a galaxy filled with men like Joran Varric. Cole knew places like this didn't last. The landing platform was a smaller clearing between ancient trees. Keela stood at the center, flanked by other Athari, her robes flowing like liquid silver, her large violet eyes locked onto the ship as it touched down. Cole powered down the engines, his fingers lingering over the controls for a moment before he unstrapped himself. He had seen enough deals, enough trades, enough broken promises to know that happy endings didn't exist. But as he looked at the crate of eggs, he allowed himself to believe just for a second that maybe this time would be different. The ramp lowered, warm air filled the cargo bay, carrying the scent of earth and life. Cole stepped forward, the grav crate hovering beside him. As he walked down the ramp, Keela met him halfway, her eyes scanning the crate, then locking onto his face. Gratitude and something deeper swimming beneath the surface. "You've done what no other would," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Her fingers reached out, hesitant, trembling. Cole pressed a button on the crate, releasing the stasis locks. One by one, the lids opened, and the soft glow of the eggs spilled into the air. Keela's breath hitched, her hands pressing against her chest. "They are whole," she whispered. Her people murmured around her, their soft voices rippling like wind through leaves. "Reverence, all love." Cole shifted on his feet, rolling his shoulders, not used to this kind of attention, just doing what was right. Keela looked up at him, something unreadable in her expression. "No, Cole Marshall, you did what was impossible." She stepped forward, placing a hand over his own for a brief moment, her skin cool against his. "You do not yet understand what you have done." Before Cole could respond, the warning alarms sounded sharp, urgent. The Athari flinched, their gazes snapping skyward. Cole followed their eyes, and his stomach clenched. Ships breaking through the clouds, sleek black syndicate hunters. No markings, no broadcasts, only one message sent through their presence alone: death. Cole cursed, spinning toward the renegade spirit, his mind already calculating exit routes. Keela stepped beside him, her voice calm but firm. "They have come for you." "Yeah, no kidding," he muttered, gripping his blaster. His mind racing. Joran had wasted no time. He had expected them to come after him. But not this fast, not this deep into Athari space. They must have been tracking his ship from the moment he jumped out of hyperspace. Damn it. He should have known better, should have taken a longer route, should have wiped his nav logs. But it was too late for regrets. Now the Athari warriors moved quickly, positioning themselves around the clearing. Energy bows drawn, their weapons ancient yet deadly. Cole could tell they had never faced enemies like these, never faced syndicate hunters who had no mercy, no hesitation, no soul. They had only prepared for war and stories. Now the war had come to them because of him. Keela turned to him, her voice steady. "Cole Marshall, can you fight?" He let out a short breath, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Lady, if I couldn't fight, I'd be dead." 10 times over he spun, drawing his blaster in one fluid motion. Cole Marshall stepped forward, placing himself between the Athari and the descending syndicate ships. The hunters moved with precision, silent and lethal, their dark armor gleaming under the jungle's filtered sunlight. Cole counted 6, no 7 of them, each one armed to the teeth. No words, no warnings, just the cold efficiency of professionals here to kill him and take back what he had stolen. The Athari warriors tightened their formation, their bioluminescent bows humming with energy. Keela remained still beside Cole, her violet eyes unreadable. The first shot came from the syndicates, a crimson bolt screaming through the air. Cole ducked, rolling to the side as it scorched the ground where he had stood. He fired back, dropping to one knee, his shots finding their marks. 2 of the hunters staggered, their armor absorbing most of the impact, but it was enough to break their formation. The Athari unleashed their bows, glowing projectiles cutting through the air, striking true. One of the syndicate hunters collapsed, his armor smoking. Another stumbled backward before regaining his stance. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They were trained, augmented, enhanced. Cole cursed under his breath, diving for cover as return fire peppered the ground around him. His mind worked fast. He needed to shift the fight in their favor. They were outgunned, but not necessarily outmatched. The Athari fought with precision and grace, but they lacked the ruthless instincts of killers. Cole didn't. He had been on both sides of the line. He knew what men like these feared: unpredictability. He tapped his wrist console, sending a quick command to the renegade spirit's external systems. A sharp beep confirmed his order. Seconds later, a blast erupted from the ship's forward thrusters, sending a wave of dirt and debris into the air. The sudden explosion created a smokescreen, disorienting the hunters. Cole used the distraction to move fast, weaving through the chaos. He closed the distance before the nearest syndicate enforcer could react. His fist slammed into the man's helmet with bone-crunching force. A sharp crack followed as Cole twisted the hunter's arm up and yanked his own blaster free, firing point blank into the exposed gap in the armor. The hunter dropped lifeless before he hit the ground, but there was no time to celebrate. Another was already moving on him, a vibroblade flashing in the dim light. Cole barely dodged, rolling to the side as the blade sliced through the air, missing his throat by inches. He lashed out his boot, connecting with the attacker's knee. A sickening pop echoed, followed by a sharp cry. But Cole didn't stop. He seized the man's wrist, twisted hard until the blade clattered to the ground, then finished him with a single shot to the chest. Healer and her warriors were holding their bows, striking with deadly accuracy. Two more syndicate hunters lay motionless, their armor scorched and sparking. But the remaining enforcers were adapting, switching tactics, pressing forward. Cole could see it, the shift in the battle. They weren't going to overpower them. They were going to break them, wear them down, force them into desperation. Not if he had anything to say about it. He sprinted toward the renegade spirit, leaping onto the boarding ramp as more shots whizzed past him. His fingers flew across the controls, rerouting power to the ship's automated defense system. Turrets swiveled, locking onto the remaining hunters. A sharp burst of cannon fire tore through the jungle, forcing them to scatter. One of them wasn't fast enough, and the blast sent him flying, his body hitting the ground in a smoking heap. The remaining two made a break for it, disappearing into the dense foliage. Cole narrowed his eyes, knowing they weren't retreating, they were repositioning. Keela stepped beside him, her face unreadable. You fight as if you are of the void. Cole Marshall, a force that takes and destroys. Cole let out a breath, checking the charge on his blaster. Yeah, well, destruction is my specialty. She watched him a moment before turning her gaze toward the jungle. They will not stop, she said. They will return in greater numbers. Cole nodded grimly. Yeah, they will, but next time we make sure they regret it. Cole Marshall stood at the edge of the clearing, his blaster still warm in his grip. The jungle was silent now, but he knew better than to trust that silence. The syndicate hunters were still out there, regrouping, waiting for reinforcements. This wasn't over, not yet. Keela stepped beside him, her violet eyes scanning the trees, her expression unreadable. The Athari warriors had gathered around her, their bows still charged, their hands steady. Despite the battle that had just unfolded, these were not soldiers. They had never been meant to fight wars. But tonight they had stood their ground, and that meant something. They will come again. Cole Marshall. Keela said, her voice soft but firm. Cole nodded, sliding his blaster into its holster. Yeah, and next time they won't just send hunters, they'll send warships, fire teams, maybe even orbital bombardment if they're feeling dramatic. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The syndicates didn't like to lose, and they especially didn't like losing to a rogue pilot and a handful of alien civilians. Keela looked down at the grav crate, where the eggs still pulsed with life, untouched by the carnage around them. She placed a hand over the lid, her fingers trembling slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. We cannot run from this, Cole Marshall. We will not. Cole sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Then we need a plan. Keela tilted her head, watching him closely. There was something behind her gaze, something ancient, something knowing. Cole Marshall, you've been running your whole life. Now you stand here with us. Will you run again? Cole let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening at his sides. He had spent his life getting into trouble, fighting the powerful and slipping away before they could ever get their hands on him. But now here he was standing with these people who had done nothing wrong except exist in the path of greed. He looked at the jungle, the sky, the Athari, the eggs. They deserved a chance to fight. No, he said finally. No, I won't run this time. Keela nodded as if she had expected that answer. Then you will help us fight. Cole let out a short, dry laugh. Fighting is the easy part. It's winning that gets tricky. The Athari warriors turned their glowing eyes to him, waiting, listening. They had never had to fight before, never had to build strategies of war. But Cole had, and right now, he was the only chance they had. "The syndicate doesn't play fair," he said. "They won't march an army to your gates. They'll try to hit you from orbit, blockade your planet, cut off your supplies, force you to surrender without firing a single shot. That's how they work, but they have weaknesses. Every crime lord, every warlord, every syndicate leader, they all have one thing in common. They hate losing money." Keela listened intently, her warriors exchanging glances. Cole stepped forward, placing a hand on the grav crate. "These eggs were worth more than their weight in credits. Whoever ordered them is going to be furious that they didn't get delivered, which means we have leverage. We can make them second guess whether coming after us is even worth it." Keela tilted her head. "What do you propose, Cole Marshall?" Cole smirked. "If they want these eggs so badly, we make them think they can have them. We set a trap, spread false information through the right channels, make them believe we're willing to negotiate. When they come for the trade, we make sure they don't leave." The Athari warriors murmured amongst themselves. This was not their way. Deception was not their nature. But Keela only watched Cole before nodding. "Then we shall prepare." The next few hours were a blur, setting traps, positioning warriors, rerouting power through the jungle's natural energy fields. Cole worked with them side by side, showing them how to fight, how to think like soldiers, but most importantly, how to make the enemy underestimate them, because that was the key to survival when you were outnumbered and outgunned. The sky began to darken, the jungle pulsing with life. As the Athari prepared for the battle to come, Cole stood at the edge of the clearing, one last time, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could feel it coming, the storm, the war, the moment where everything would either end or begin. And he took a deep breath, checking his blaster one last time before turning to Keela. "Let's give them a reason to regret ever coming here."